So that Germany in a single year took in an additional 2% of its population, that Sweden took in an additional almost 3% of its population. This is all part of a pattern, I say, that has been going on for many decades. And just like those previous decades, what happened after the 2015 crisis was that politicians and the media found excuses to justify something that would have happened anyway. So, for instance, German citizens and others were told that this mass migration, millions of people into Europe, would be a net economic gain for their society, that it would enrich their society. Now, actually, all of the studies that I've gone over in this show that, at best, most such migration cannot be called to be any kind of economic gain. A study in Britain showed that over a 15-year period, migrants took out 95 billion more in services than they put in taxation. And of course they would. If you go to another country, you don't speak the language, you don't have the skills, it's going to be a very long time before you've put in anything into the welfare system remotely like the amount that you and your family will have taken out. But this is one of the arguments that are made. And by the way, just as in all of the decades after the war, so in the post-2015 moment, the governments that came up with these explanations had to hedge around the facts, so that just like the Labour government after 1997, they had to pretend that the average migrant was a Luxembourgian hedge funder. And this is just one of the lies that gets told to the people. Because once that one is shot down, once, for instance, you notice that the number of people who've been added to Germany's welfare bill in the last year is almost exactly the number of the people who came in 2015. Once you go over that lie, you get to another one, which the German people and others were told, which is that we are an aging population, we are a greying population, and that therefore we need, obviously, to bring people in to keep us and our society into the standards to which we've become accustomed. Of course, this argument always ignores one extraordinary thing which none of the politicians ever seem to be able to recognize, which is the startling fact that migrants get old as well. It's amazingly enough, it's not just us Europeans who suffer the aging process. Who knew? But of course, if you do believe in that idea, that you need to keep on bringing people to keep yourself in the custom that you're now used to, you get what I describe as the pyramid problem in migration. You keep having to bring in more and more people all the time to keep yourselves in that a sustainable societal moment. But so once you get the one of, well, okay, maybe they don't make us richer, maybe the aging population thing doesn't work, you get to another one, which is diversity. It doesn't matter if we're financially poorer. It doesn't matter because we're so much more culturally rich. Now, I should say that there is something in this. What society, Europeans certainly wouldn't do, is what society doesn't want to know as much of interest and culture as the world has to offer. Who doesn't want to know as much about the world and about the ideas of the world as possible? But, of course, the first person from, for instance, India to bring Indian cuisine into the UK does an interesting service, vimms up the local cuisine. It's not the case that the next 100 Indians who come in, for instance, bring 100 times more interesting cuisine. It's not the case that the first Sudanese poet who enters the UK massively brings interest to your country, and that the next 1,000 people from Sudan continue to just bring ever richer versions of the poetry of Sudan. And by the way, please don't ask me to name my favorite Sudanese poet. But this is just a part of that lie. They also say, you also notice, by the way, that this is always a one-way street. Not once in my adult life have I heard anybody say that the thing that Eritrea needs most is an injection of Welshmen. that they just could do with some Welsh cooking. Or singing. Nobody says this. Nobody says, as Mark Stein and I were saying in a conversation recently, nobody says, the thing that the Somalis really need is a bit more Bach. I actually think it'd be nice for them if they had a bit more Bach, but nobody thinks that's an appropriate way to say it. But Europeans are told there's something hollow at our heart, as if we in Europe, the culture of Dante and Goethe and Bach, has some kind of diminishment, something hollow at its center that needs filling by the world. And then you get to another stage in this, which is, okay, maybe it doesn't make you richer. Maybe the aging population thing does fall apart. Maybe the diversity thing isn't all it's cracked up to be. Or, as I put it at one point in my book, maybe we have to just do an agreement this is a quid pro quo. We have a bit more gang rape and beheading than we used to have, but then there's a wider range of cuisines, so who's to... Life's all swings and roundabouts, so... but then you get to the last stage of that, which is the one that politicians now say and speak to us about, which is, okay, maybe none of these things are the case. Well, suck it up. This is globalization. This is going to happen anyway. This is a hell of a way to speak to the general public about their and their children's future. And it is only said, once again, to the peoples of Europe in this tone. So, I explain at great length not just the stats and the results of my travels across not just all of Europe, but many of the countries that the migrants have been coming from, trying to explain in as much detail and with much honesty as possible the reality of the situation that my continent now faces, but also to explain the deeper underlying reasons why this might be happening. Because it seems to me that what I describe as the strange death of Europe, I say in the opening line, Europe is committing suicide, or at least its leaders have decided to commit suicide. Whether the publics agree to go along with that or not is another matter. Now, this strange death, this suicide, seems to me to be a very unnatural thing to happen in nature. And so there must be, and I posit that there are, deeper underlying reasons for it. One is what I describe, taking it from the French philosopher Pascal Bruckner, to be the tyranny of guilt, this overwhelming guilt, that, specifically the German guilt that has spread across the continent in the decades since the war. You, of course, in America have a very clear version of this yourself. Just as we in Europe now have this myth of original sin, so you now have it in America. The original sin of slavery, the original sin of racism, and the European versions of the original sin of colonialism, and so on. Again, it's a one-way movement. And of course we fall for it, as everybody who has children, grandchildren, or has attended an American campus in recent years knows. If you say to a student, and I do it quite often, what is your solution for instance, the problems that Nigeria currently faces? They have no solutions, they have no suggestions, very few of them can point to the country on a map. But the one thing they all can be sure about is that at some point it must have been their or their ancestors' fault. The fastest fast track to look like you're a knowledgeable young person is to blame yourself and your own society. And, as I say at another point in the book, this is the problem that I'm told we get to, the big problem I'm told, I stress, that masochists always risk, which is what happens to them when they meet a real sadist. And Europe is meeting a real sadist. So you think you're appalling, empty, barren, rubbish, guilty. We agree. This seems to me to be the worst possible concatenation of events. The mass movement of peoples into a society, then at the point that that society appears to have lost its own faith in itself. This, two of the other big underlying issues I raise in the book, are what I call, firstly, the sense of European tiredness. There's a German word I use that translates roughly as tiredness with history, or weariness with history, where you've gone through so many of the wars of religion, the wars of nation states, the wars of ideas, the political dreams, that you're just tired of it all. And that, at that point, a change might be as good as a rest.